Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to look into the life of Nicholas Todd Sutton.
Okay.
He was an American serial killer executed in 2020.
Wow. Okay.
You might be thinking, another true crime story.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This one ends with him choosing the electric chair.
Oh, wow.
So we're working with excerpts from a Wikipedia article about Sutton today.
Okay.
Feel free to follow along if you want.
Right.
Our mission today is to figure out how a troubled childhood leads to a path of brutal murders.
Yeah.
But then it ends with these claims of redemption on death row.
It's a fascinating paradox. How can someone do all these terrible things and still claim to be a changed man?
Yeah, exactly. And to understand how that happens, we need to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
His childhood was, to put it mildly, rough.
Oh, boy.
Abandoned by his mother, raised by an alcoholic and abusive father.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's a classic case of a traumatic upbringing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's really striking is the early exposure to drugs. Sutton's father got him into drugs when he was really young,
Wow.
which, as you can imagine, set the stage for a lifelong struggle with addiction.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's something we see a lot in criminal cases, actually.
It makes sense.
The impact of early trauma is hard to overcome.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And then to make matters worse, after his father died,
Yeah.
Sutton was taken in by his grandmother, Dorothy.
Oh,
She seemed like a good influence,
Mhm.
someone who really tried to give him a stable home.
right.
But even with that support,
Yeah.
Sutton continued to spiral deeper into drugs and criminal activity.
It's like the early trauma just casts such a long shadow.
It really does.
Oh.
And that brings us to Christmas of 1979.
Okay.
Sutton reported his grandmother missing,
Right.
said he last saw her with this unknown man,
Okay.
but the police knew something was off.
What tipped them off?
Well, the crime scene at Dorothy's house was pretty gruesome.
Oh, no.
Blood everywhere, carpets, walls, floors.
Oh, my gosh.
It was clear something awful had happened.
Yeah.
Sutton quickly became the prime suspect.
Right?
His story didn't add up, and eventually he confessed.
Oh, wow.
It was a horrifying act. He killed his grandmother,
Ow.
stuffed her body in a bag, weighed it down with a cinder block, and threw it in the Nolichucky River.
Oh, my goodness. That's awful.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And to make it worse, his story kept changing.
Really?
First, he denied any involvement, then he blamed a contractor named Charles Ullman.
It sounds like he was trying to distance himself from what he did.
Yeah, exactly. But his confessions didn't end there.
There's more.
He also admitted to killing his friend John Michael Large.
Oh, geez.
And the details are brutal.
What did he do?
He beat him with a dog chain, choked him, and then shoved a piece of plywood down his throat.
Wow. That's intense. That's beyond just murder.
Yeah, it speaks to a level of rage and cruelty that's hard to comprehend.
Absolutely.
And then it gets even crazier. He claims to have also killed Charles Ullman.
The contractor.
Yeah, the one he blamed for his grandmother's death.
Right.
Said he dumped the body in a quarry.
So did they find the body?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. They did find bodies in the quarry.
Okay.
Multiple bodies.
Oh, wow.
But none of them were Ullman's.
Really?
They were totally unrelated to Sutton.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Why confess to a murder you didn't commit?
Right. It's a real head-scratcher. Was he trying to cover his tracks, or did he just want the attention?
Who knows? Maybe he was trying to make himself seem more dangerous than he actually was.
And as if that wasn't enough, he confessed to 2 more murders.
Wait, there's more?
An Alcoa teenager and a drug buyer.
Wow.
But those were never proven.
It just keeps getting more and more complicated.
Yeah, so at this point, he's been convicted of 3 murders.
His grandmother
His friend John Michael Large,
and the contractor.
Charles Ullman.
Yeah.
Yep, and that got him a life sentence.
So that's it, right? The end of the story?
Oh, no, not even close. This
Let's
is just where things start to get really interesting.
Oh, boy. I can't wait to hear what happens next.
So he's in prison, life sentence. You think about life in prison. And it sounds terrible, but for someone like Sutton with this violent history,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder if more violence was inevitable.
Well, prison's not exactly known for being a peaceful place.
Right?
Lots of power struggles,
Yeah.
gang activity, the constant threat of violence.
Yeah, it's like a pressure cooker.
And that's exactly what happened. In 1985, just a few years into his sentence,
Yeah.
Sutton was involved in another murder
Another one
inside the prison.
inside the prison. This time, the victim was Carl Isaac Estep,
Oh, wow.
an inmate serving time for raping a 9-year-old girl.
Oh, gosh.
And the way they killed him, it was brutal.
What happened?
They stabbed him 38 times.
48 times.
38 times. And it wasn't just Sutton.
Oh, no.
3 other inmates were involved in the attack.
That's just insane. I mean, that's not just about ending someone's life.
No.
That's pure rage,
It's a level of violence that's hard to comprehend.
especially in a place that's already supposed to be about punishment.
You'd think they'd be getting enough of that already.
Right. So what was the motive? Well, it seems like it was a fight over drugs.
Drugs in prison.
Yeah, even in a place like that, drugs have a way of finding their way in.
That's wild. And those drugs can lead to some serious violence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even behind bars, these things can happen.
Yeah. So for Öztep's murder, Sutton was sentenced to death.
Okay.
And that's where things take a really interesting turn.
How so?
Well, this wasn't a quick death sentence.
Right.
This was the start of decades of appeals and court battles.
Wow. So we have Sutton on death row
Yeah.
facing execution, but
But here's where it gets complicated. Two very different stories about Sutton begin to emerge.
okay, I'm intrigued.
On one hand, you have Sutton's supporters.
Family and friends.
Yeah, but it wasn't just them, some prison officials, even some guards.
Really?
They claimed that Sutton had changed, that he'd undergone a major transformation.
That he was a different person now.
Exactly. They pointed to times when he saved guards' lives during prison riots,
Wow.
or when he acted as a caregiver to sick inmates. They were painting this picture of a redeemed man.
Someone who had turned his life around.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, you have the victims' families.
Right.
They're still dealing with the pain and loss from Sutton's crimes. For
Okay.
them, there's no chance of
And
redemption.
they want justice for their loved ones.
Exactly. John Large's sister, for example,
Yeah.
she became a huge advocate for Sutton's execution.
She wanted him to pay for what he did.
Absolutely. So you have these two completely opposite views.
It's a real moral dilemma.
Yeah. It makes you question, can someone who's done such horrible things actually change?
Is redemption even possible on death row?
These are tough questions, and the justice system had to try to make sense of it all.
It's a difficult situation trying to balance the need for punishment with the idea of rehabilitation.
So what happened? How did the courts deal with this?
Well, despite the pleas from Sutton supporters, the courts upheld the death sentence.
Oh, wow.
And this is where we come back to Sutton's decision to choose the electric chair.
Instead of lethal injection?
Right? That was the other option available to him.
It was a decision that caught everyone's attention.
It definitely brought the death penalty back into the spotlight.
And it made people really think about the different methods of execution.
Yeah, the electric chair has a long and controversial history.
For sure. Some people saw Sutton's choice as a final act of defiance.
Like he wanted to go out on his own terms.
Yeah. Or maybe it was something deeper, a reflection of his personal beliefs.
Who knows?
Governor Bill Lee refused to grant clemency,
Okay.
and the Supreme Court didn't intervene. On February 20th, 2020, at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution,
Yeah.
Nicholas Todd Sutton was executed.
Wow. There's a lot to think about in those final moments.
Definitely.
The choices he made, the words he spoke.
It's a lot to unpack. I mean, it's hard to imagine,
Yeah.
Sutton calmly taking communion right before his execution, but he did.
Yeah.
And then thinking about the brutal murders he committed.
Yeah. It's hard to reconcile those two images.
It's a lot to process. What are we supposed to make of that final act of faith?
It's one of those things that makes this case so fascinating.
Yeah.
You have a man who did these terrible things.
Right.
But then in his last moments, he's looking for comfort in his faith.
Right.
It makes you think about the nature of redemption, you know?
Yeah.
Can someone really find peace after a life like that?
It's tough. I get why the victims' families would be skeptical.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you forgive someone who caused so much pain?
It's a lot to ask.
Right. But then you hear about those prison guards and how Sutton saved their lives.
Yeah.
And you can't help but wonder if he really did change.
It's a tough one. There's no easy answer.
Exactly. And then there's the whole electric chair thing. It just adds another layer to the whole story.
Was it defiance? Was it a way to control the narrative one last time?
Who knows? Maybe it was something deeper.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
We may never know.
But what we do know is that Sutton's choice brought the death penalty back into the public eye, especially the methods of execution.
Yeah, the electric chair has a really dark history.
For sure.
And it's a reminder that even in death, there are still choices to be made.
Yeah, and those choices can have a ripple effect.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Nicholas Todd Sutton, what stands out to you?
I think what gets me is those lingering questions.
Yeah.
Can people really change after doing such awful things? Is redemption possible, even on death row?
And how do we make sense of the different sides of Sutton that we see?
Yeah, you have the cold-blooded killer, the troubled kid, and then the supposedly reformed inmate.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And those are questions worth thinking about.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important parts of exploring these kinds of cases. They
Yeah.
make us question our assumptions.
And force us to look at some uncomfortable truths about humanity.
Right. And it reminds us that even in the darkest parts of human nature, there can still be complexity.
It's not always black and white.
Exactly. We started this deep dive wanting to understand how a troubled childhood could lead to such a violent path.
And end with such a shocking choice.
Exactly. And I think we've uncovered some things.
Yeah.
But there are still so many questions.
So many pieces of the puzzle still missing.
That's how it goes with these deep dives sometimes.
You go in looking for answers, but you often come out with more questions.
It's true. And maybe that's the point.
Yeah, to make us think, to challenge our perspectives.
And to remind us that there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
Until next time.